So in the previous videos of this series, we saw how to deploy a simple application using Cloud 66, Skycap, stencils, and formations onto my Minikube Kubernetes cluster. Now this time I want to deploy the same application, but this time I want to enforce some best practices and also reuse some of the code and the configuration that I write inside of the Kubernetes configuration files. And for that, I thought it's a good practice or a good exercise to show how to do that with a concept in Kubernetes called sidecars. Now, a sidecar in a Kubernetes application, a Kubernetes deployment, is a container that runs inside of the same pod and provides a service or gateways the access, for example, to the main application container. For that, I just wrote a very simple reverse proxy app in Go that will enforce, that will ask for username and password very securely, as you can see here, and will then pass on the traffic if the correct username and password is provided, pass on the traffic to the upstream backend container. My intention is to build a formation, put my application into a container, and then put the reverse proxy called author, in this case, as a sidecar to that same pod, and make sure the access and the traffic always goes through my sidecar, and also enforce that policy across the entire formation to make sure that any other developer and team member that I have within my team will not forget to protect their services with the username and password. So let's just create another formation. I'm going to call this one local 3, and I'm going to use my demo templates. As you remember, we need to set up our namespace and also give the credentials to the Docker registry to the cluster. So let's do that by using the setup YAML. And then now, the next thing that I need is I need to deploy the application. Now, this is the one that I have in my demo template library. As you can see, it's a normal Kubernetes deployment, but with a difference from last time, and that is this is the same and it runs my application, but here I have a sidecar that runs the reverse proxy. Now, while this is good, and if I put the right ports here, it will work, and I can show you that, this is not really reusable. It means that I have to go and change that and add that to every one of those services that I add. So in the next couple of steps, what I want to show you is the first to get this to work with asking the username and password, and then take out the sidecar and replace it with something more usable and reusable, more importantly. So first, let's just get it to work to see how it operates. In this case, instead of serving the application on port 5000, I'm going to serve it on port 5001 and make the reverse proxy to serve traffic on port 5000. This technically will still serve the traffic outside of this pod on port 5000, but within the pod, my traffic will be redirected from 5000 to 5001 if the correct credentials are provided. Now, naturally, I need a service which will need an external port, and internally we're serving on 5000. So let's commit this into the Git repository as well. So now I have the 3 files that I need to deploy my app. I'm just going to head out to formations and render them. My 3 files are here. I'm going to take the command line tool, as we saw before, add my account. And here is the rendered version, which I can then apply pipe to kube control. Great. So now I have the namespace. I can use minikube to check out the application. As you can see, this time, instead of showing me the web page, it's asking for username and password. Let's just enter the very secure username and password. And here we are. Okay. So that was great, but not very reusable. Here, we had 3 files, and we went and added the sidecar configuration to the stencil. And imagine, that works fine, but if you have a lot of services, you will need to add this every time. So how can we make it better? Well, one thing that we have in Skycap stencils is the concept of inlining. And it's very simple in principle. So what I've written here is an inline only for the sidecar. This is just that part of the deployment that you saw, except that it doesn't have the ports that I want. And here I'm happy to hard-code the ports and not get it from a configuration file or an environment variable just for the purpose of demo, but obviously you will need to get that from somewhere else if you want to reuse this for multiple different ports. So now I'm adding the inline for reverse proxy. And I'm going to go and make a change in my deployment to take out the sidecar, and get it from an inline. One thing here to notice or to remember is that because it's YAML and it requires indentation the right amount, so I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces as indentation. So now my inline knows that it will have to render this inline with 8 spaces in. Okay, great. Now if I head to rendering my formation, well, that's an interesting one. So the rendering part actually worked, but one thing that I forgot to do was to set the sidecar's port, and my rendering failed because I don't have the required port entered, which is actually well, it wasn't part of the demo, but it's great to see how a mistake in the stencil will be shown. So let's go back to formations, and in my author I'm going to change this and put the right value in. Now I go back to formation rendering, and this time I can see that my formation is rendered correctly and my deployment has the right sidecar. So again, this is great because it allows me build templates and reuse parts of it specifically around areas like this, which is applying a sidecar, or if I have a lot of environment variables or configurations or volume mounts into pods and deployments that I need to repeat for every service that I have. Inlines are great for that, and it will be very, very helpful for me to use this. One thing, however, that is still not perfect is that, in theory, if I go and add another service, I can forget to add this inline, and then my service will be exposed without any security with username and passwords. So how can I make sure of that? Well, that's where an open source project from Cloud 66 comes in called Copper. And Copper is a product that it's open source and it's a command line tool, but it's well integrated and embedded into Skycap as well, where it checks for different policies to make sure that they are completely adhered to when a stencil is rendered. In this example, I'm going to use a policy that enforces application of the sidecar. Now, you can go head to copper.sh and see how Copper works and how to set it up and how its rules look like. But here, for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to use one rule that I've written before, and I can add it in the policies section here. So this is the rule that I've written. I'm just going to give it the name, use author, and I'm going to say Skycap should apply this rule on any deployment, as in Kubernetes kind deployment. Okay, great. So what's in this rule? First things, it does two checks. One is it makes sure that all my pods have a sidecar called author latest. And the second thing it does is it checks to make sure that I've configured the ports correctly. So port 5000 is the one that author uses, as opposed to, just putting the sidecar container in, but forgetting to adjust the ports, and therefore bypassing the entire sidecar and still hitting the service directly without any encryption or any authentication. Now, this is the rule that I've written. Obviously, you can go again to Copper.sh and see how Copper can help with other things that you want to enforce. But for the purpose of this demo, let's just add this rule enforcement to the Git repository. And render our stencils. This time it should work because we have done the right thing and we have the sidecar configured correctly and set up. But if I were to go back to my formations and break that rule by going to my deployment, for example, and taking out the entire inline, so technically leaving my service unprotected, if I tried to deploy this, I will get that I've broken two rules. Rule 1 being the port, rule 2, my sidecar is missing. So this 3-episode video series was a short and quick introduction to Skycap. Obviously, there's a lot more that Skycap can do and help you when it comes to deploying your applications to any Kubernetes cluster. And we tried it only with the local mini-kube deployment. Obviously, you can take the same formation and deploy it to any Kubernetes that you have on public or private cloud. If you like this, you can come to cloud66.com and check out Skycap with a free trial, or head out to any of the open source projects that we have, including Copper, Habitus, and Starter, and check them out as well. Hopefully it's a useful thing to you. Thank you.